The pen shook in Evelyn's hand. Kyungtae slid the divorce papers across the glass table without looking at her. "Sign it," he said, his voice flat, cold, empty.
Sign it.
Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she stretched her hand out to take the papers. She didn't know that inside her, a life was already growing. She didn't know the man in front of her was about to destroy his own heart to save hers. She signed her name with shaking fingers. And 3 floors below, a black car was already watching the building, waiting for her to walk out alone. Hello, besties. Welcome to Beyond Soul Stories. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment what time you're watching this, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on more intense stories like this one. 3 years before that morning in the lawyer's office, Evelyn Carter was just a woman from Atlanta trying to build a life for herself on the other side of the world. She had grown up in a small brick house off Cascade Road, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put her through college. Evelyn studied education, and after graduation, she found herself restless, wanting more than what Atlanta could offer at the time. A friend told her about a teaching program in Seoul that paid well and covered housing. She packed 2 suitcases and left. Seoul was loud in a different way than Atlanta. The streets were cleaner, the trains were faster, and everywhere she turned there was a language she didn't understand yet. She taught English to business executives in Gangnam, men and women in suits who barely had time to breathe between meetings. That was how she met Kyungtae Han. He wasn't her student. He was waiting for one of his associates in the same building where she taught, sitting in a lobby with his phone in his hand, not really looking at it. Evelyn walked past him, tripped slightly on the edge of a rug, and he caught her bag before it hit the floor. That was it. That was the whole moment. No fireworks, no music, just a Korean man in an expensive suit catching a black woman's bag in a Gangnam lobby. They started talking. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks along the Han River, where Kyungtae would point out buildings and tell her stories about the city, careful never to mention what he really did for a living. Evelyn didn't ask too many questions in the beginning. She liked that he listened when she talked about Atlanta, about her mother, about the dream she had for her future. He liked that she wasn't afraid of him, even before she knew there was anything to be afraid of. It took almost 8 months before Kyungtae told her the truth about his family. They were sitting in his car outside her apartment in Itaewon when he finally said it plainly. "My family is not a normal family," he said. "We are involved in things that are dangerous. I need you to know this before it goes further between us." Evelyn remembered staring at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say he was joking. He didn't. His face was serious, almost pleading, like he expected her to open the door and walk away forever. She didn't walk away. She asked questions instead, and he answered every one of them honestly, laying out the parts of his life that most men would have hidden. His father had built a syndicate out of Busan decades ago, moving money and making enemies long before Kyungtae was born. When his father died, the responsibility fell on Kyungtae's shoulders, whether he wanted it or not. He told her there would be risks tied to loving him, and she had every right to leave. Evelyn sat with that information for 2 days before she called him and told him she wasn't going anywhere. Mrs. Han was not as easy to convince. When Kyungtae brought Evelyn home for the first time, his mother barely looked at her. She spoke only in short sentences, her eyes sharp and unreadable, studying Evelyn like she was inspecting a piece of furniture she didn't trust. Dinner was tense. Evelyn tried to speak the little Korean she had learned, and Mrs. Han corrected her pronunciation without smiling. Later that night, Kyungtae apologized to Evelyn in the car, but Evelyn told him it was fine. She understood. A mother's approval wasn't something that came instantly, especially not for a son carrying the weight of an entire family business. It took almost a year for Mrs. Han's coldness to soften. It happened slowly through small things. Evelyn showing up at the house with soup when Mrs. Han was sick. Evelyn learning to make kimchi the way Mrs. Han liked it, ruining 3 batches before she got it right. Evelyn sitting with Mrs. Han during long afternoons, listening to stories about Kyungtae's father, about the family's history, about the burdens that came with the name Han. By the time Kyungtae proposed to Evelyn on a rooftop overlooking the city lights, Mrs. Han was the one who cried the hardest at the wedding, dressed in her finest hanbok, holding Evelyn's hand and calling her daughter for the first time. The wedding itself was a mix of 2 worlds. Evelyn's mother flew in from Atlanta with 3 of her sisters, filling the reception hall with loud laughter and southern hospitality that confused some of the more traditional Korean guests but charmed most of them. Ada Okonkwo, Evelyn's best friend from college, flew in from Houston, where she was working as a fashion buyer at the time before later relocating to Seoul herself. Ada stood beside Evelyn the entire day, making jokes to calm her nerves, reminding her that she was marrying a good man, even if that man came with a dangerous last name. For the first 2 years of their marriage, life was mostly peaceful. Kyung-tae kept the darker parts of his work far away from their home. Evelyn continued teaching, eventually opening a small consulting business, helping international companies communicate better with Korean partners. They traveled together when they could, spending a week in Los Angeles visiting Evelyn's cousins, another week in Toronto for a friend's wedding, always returning to Seoul, always returning to each other. The trouble started quietly, the way real trouble often does. Min Jun Choi, Kyung-tae's second-in-command, came to him one evening with information that made his stomach turn. A rival syndicate out of Busan, led by a man named Tae-sik Baek, had been asking questions about Kyung-tae's personal life. Not his business dealings, not his territory, but his wife. Where she worked, what car she drove, what time she left the apartment in the mornings. Kyung-tae didn't tell Evelyn at first. He increased security around their apartment without explaining why, told his driver to take different routes, hired 2 more men to watch the building where Evelyn taught her private clients. Evelyn noticed the changes but assumed it was normal business precaution. She had learned not to ask too many questions about his work, trusting that he would tell her what she needed to know. Then the envelope arrived. It was left at the front desk of their apartment building. No name, no stamp, addressed simply to Kyung-tae Han. Inside was a single photograph of Evelyn walking out of her apartment, taken from across the street, her face clearly visible, time-stamped just 2 days earlier. There was no note attached. There didn't need to be one. The message was clear. Tae-sik Baek knew who Evelyn was, and he wanted Kyung-tae to know that he knew. Kyung-tae sat with that photograph for almost an hour before he called Min Jun into his office. "They found her," he said quietly. Min Jun's face went pale. Both men understood what this meant. In their world, family was the most effective form of leverage. If Tae-sik couldn't get to Kyung-tae directly, he would go through the person Kyung-tae loved most. That night, Kyung-tae didn't sleep. He watched Evelyn breathing beside him in the dark, her hand resting on her stomach out of habit, not knowing yet what was growing inside her. He thought about every scenario, every possible way to protect her, and each one led back to the same painful conclusion. As long as the world saw her as his wife, she would be a target. The only way to truly protect her was to make Tae-sik believe she meant nothing to him anymore. He began pulling away slowly at first. Shorter conversations, missed dinners. Evelyn noticed immediately, because that wasn't who Kyung-tae was. He had always made time for her, no matter how busy the business got. She asked him if something was wrong, and he told her he was just tired, just stressed with work. She believed him because she had no reason not to. The distance grew wider over the following weeks. Kyung-tae started sleeping in the guest room, claiming his late meetings kept him up too late to disturb her. He stopped touching her the way he used to, stopped reaching for her hand in the car, stopped kissing her forehead before he left in the mornings. Evelyn felt the shift in her bones before she could name it. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse. If you've made it this far into the story and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, I need you to ask yourself why. Evelyn gave everything to this marriage, trusted this man with her whole heart, and you're out here scrolling past without even subscribing to see how her story ends. Hit subscribe now, because if you don't, you'll be the one left wondering what happened, and that guilt will be on you. 3 weeks after the envelope arrived, Kyung-tae told Evelyn he wanted a divorce. He didn't explain why. He couldn't, because the truth would put her in more danger, not less. Tae-sik's men were watching, and any hint that Kyung-tae still cared for her would confirm exactly what they suspected. He had to make it convincing. He had to make it hurt. Evelyn didn't cry in front of him that first night. She waited until she was in the bathroom, running the shower, so he wouldn't hear her. She called Ada immediately after, her voice breaking as she tried to explain what was happening. Ada, who had relocated to Seoul 2 years earlier for a fashion buying job, dropped everything and came straight to the apartment. He didn't even give you a reason? Ada asked, sitting on the edge of the bathtub while Evelyn sat on the floor, her back against the wall. He said things changed, Evelyn whispered, that he doesn't feel the same way anymore. That doesn't sound like Hyung Tae, Ada said, shaking her head. That man has looked at you like you hung the moon since the day I met him. Evelyn didn't have an answer for that. She only knew what he told her, and what he told her was that their marriage was over. Over the following days, Evelyn tried everything to reach him, to understand what had changed so suddenly. Hyung Tae remained cold, distant, repeating the same rehearsed lines every time she tried to talk to him. Each conversation left her more confused and more broken than the last. She started losing weight, barely eating, spending most of her time in bed with the curtains closed. It was during one of these low points that Evelyn started feeling nauseous in the mornings, a feeling she initially blamed on stress and lack of sleep. Ada was the one who suggested she take a test, noticing the pattern before Evelyn did. They sat together in Evelyn's bathroom, waiting for the results, Ada holding Evelyn's hand tightly. 2 lines appeared. Evelyn stared at the test for a long time, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of joy and devastation crashing into her at the same time. She was carrying Hyung Tae's child at the exact moment he was walking away from her. She didn't know how to feel. Part of her wanted to run to him immediately to tell him, to see if this news would change anything. Another part of her was terrified that it wouldn't, that he would still sign those papers regardless of what was growing inside her. She decided to wait, to process everything on her own before deciding what to do next. What she didn't know was that someone else was about to find out before she was ready. Mrs. Han had noticed something was wrong with her son for weeks. Hyung Tae had stopped visiting for their usual Sunday dinners, giving vague excuses about work. When she finally showed up at his office unannounced, demanding to know what was going on, Min-jun was the one who accidentally let the truth slip, telling her about the divorce papers being prepared, assuming she already knew. Mrs. Han's face went white with anger and confusion. She left the office immediately, driving straight to Evelyn's apartment, something she rarely did without calling first. When Evelyn opened the door, red-eyed and exhausted, Mrs. Han's heart broke seeing the state her daughter-in-law was in. "Tell me everything," Mrs. Han said, sitting Evelyn down at the kitchen table. Evelyn explained what little she knew, how Hyung Tae had suddenly wanted a divorce, offering no real explanation. Mrs. Han listened carefully, her mind working through everything, connecting it to the increased security she had noticed around the family, the whispers among the men about trouble with the Busan syndicate. She had lived this life long enough to recognize the pattern. Her son wasn't leaving Evelyn because he stopped loving her. He was pushing her away to protect her. It was during this conversation that Evelyn finally told Mrs. Han about the pregnancy, her hands shaking as she spoke the words out loud for the first time. Mrs. Han's eyes filled with tears, but underneath the emotion was a fire building, an anger directed entirely at her son. The next morning, Mrs. Han went straight to Hyung Tae's office, walking past the guards who knew better than stop her. Hyung Tae was at his desk, the divorce papers laid out in front of him, waiting to be finalized that same day at the lawyer's office. His mother dropped a folder on top of the papers without a word. "What is this?" Hyung Tae asked, confused. "Open it," Mrs. Han said, her voice sharp. Inside was a printout Evelyn had shown her, a picture of the pregnancy test, along with dates and details Evelyn had shared during their conversation. Hyung Tae's face went pale as he read through it, his hands trembling slightly for the first time in weeks. "You are about to throw away your wife," Mrs. Han said, her voice shaking with anger. "And you don't even know she is carrying your child." Hyung Tae sat frozen, unable to speak. Everything he thought he understood about his plan suddenly felt impossible. He had convinced himself he was protecting Evelyn by pushing her away. But now there was a child involved, a piece of himself growing inside the woman he was trying to save through abandonment. "Do you think this makes it easier?" he finally said, his voice breaking. "Tae-sik knows about her. If he finds out about a child, it makes things worse, not better. So your solution is to let her sign papers believing you never loved her." Mrs. Han shot back. "To let her raise your child, thinking her husband abandoned her for no reason? You are a coward, Hyung Tae. Your father would never have handled it this way." The mention of his father hit Kyung-tae harder than anything else could have. He sat back in his chair, running his hands over his face, the weight of everything finally crashing down on him. He had spent weeks convincing himself that silence was protection, that cruelty was kindness in disguise, but sitting there with his mother's words ringing in his ears, he realized how wrong he had been. That same afternoon, instead of going to the lawyer's office to finalize the divorce, Kyung-tae went straight to Evelyn's apartment. Min-jun tried to stop him at first, worried about security, worried about what it would mean if Tae-sik's men saw him there. Kyung-tae didn't care anymore. He had spent enough time hiding behind fear. Evelyn opened the door and found him standing there, something different in his eyes than she had seen in weeks. Before she could say anything, he stepped inside and told her everything. The envelope, the photograph, Tae-sik bike, the threats, the reason behind every cold word he had spoken to her over the past month. Evelyn listened in silence, tears streaming down her face as pieces of the past few weeks finally made sense. When he finished, she didn't immediately forgive him. The pain of feeling abandoned, even for a reason, still sat heavy in her chest. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "I would have understood. I would have helped you figure out together instead of letting me believe you stopped loving me." "I was afraid," Kyung-tae admitted. "Afraid that if I told you, you would insist on staying close, and that would put you in more danger. I thought I was protecting you." "You almost lost me," Evelyn said. "Not to Tae-sik, to yourself, to your own silence." Kyung-tae knelt down in front of her, placing his hand gently on her stomach, still processing the reality of the child growing there. "I won't make that mistake again," he said. "Whatever happens with Tae-sik, we face it together. I already have Min-jun working on a plan to deal with him properly, not by hiding you, but by protecting you the right way." Over the following weeks, Kyung-tae worked with Min-jun and a small group of trusted men to handle the threat from Tae-sik Baek directly, rather than running from it. It wasn't a quick or simple process. There were tense meetings, careful negotiations, and moments where things could have gone terribly wrong. But with his mother's guidance, and Evelyn standing beside him instead of hidden away, Kyung-tae approached the situation with a clarity he hadn't had when he was trying to solve everything alone. Mrs. Han moved into the apartment temporarily during the most dangerous weeks, insisting on being close to Evelyn as her pregnancy progressed. The two women grew even closer during that time, cooking together, talking for hours, Mrs. Han sharing stories about raising Kyung-tae, about the sacrifices that came with loving a man from a family like theirs. Ada remained a constant presence as well, flying between her work commitments and Evelyn's apartment, refusing to leave her best friend's side during such an uncertain time. The four of them, Evelyn, Kyung-tae, Mrs. Han, and Ada, formed a tight circle around the pregnancy, determined to protect both Evelyn and the baby no matter what came their way. Slowly, the tension with Tae-sik Baek began to settle, not through violence, but through a careful balance of power and negotiation that Kyung-tae handled with his mother's guidance. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough to remove the immediate danger hanging over Evelyn's life. Months later, in a hospital room in Seoul, Evelyn gave birth to a baby girl. Kyung-tae stood beside her the entire time, holding her hand, refusing to let go even when the nurses asked him to step back. When the baby was finally placed in Evelyn's arms, Mrs. Han stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down her face, looking at her granddaughter for the first time. "She has your eyes," Mrs. Han said to Kyung-tae, reaching out to touch the baby's small hand. Evelyn looked up at Kyung-tae, exhaustion and joy mixing together on her face. "We almost lost this," she said softly. "All of it." Kyung-tae leaned down and kissed her forehead, something he hadn't done in what felt like forever. "Never again," he said. "I promise you that. If this story touched you the way I think it did, please don't scroll away without hitting that subscribe button." Evelyn fought through heartbreak, fear, and uncertainty to protect her family. And if you don't subscribe right now, but doing her story a disservice. Every like, every comment, every share helps this story reach someone else who needs to hear it. So don't be the reason this story doesn't get the attention it deserves. Life didn't return to what it was before overnight. There were still moments of tension, Still nights where Kyung-tae had to leave suddenly for business that Evelyn knew better than to ask too many questions about. But the silence between them was gone. He told her things now, even the hard things, trusting her to stand beside him instead of hiding her from the truth. Ada eventually married a Korean businessman she met through Evelyn's circle, settling permanently in Seoul, still showing up at Evelyn's apartment unannounced with takeout and gossip. Mrs. Han remained close to the family, spoiling her granddaughter every chance she got, often reminding Kyung-tae not to repeat the mistakes of silence that almost cost him everything. Evelyn eventually expanded her consulting business, splitting her time between Seoul and occasional trips back to Atlanta, bringing her daughter along to meet family on both sides of the world. The little girl grew up between two cultures, two languages, two histories woven together by two people who almost lost each other over fear and misunderstanding. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask questions about how her parents met, Evelyn would tell her a simplified version of the story, leaving out the darker details but keeping the heart of it intact. A story about a woman who came from Atlanta looking for adventure, and a man from Seoul who caught her bag in a lobby, and a grandmother who refused to let fear destroy her family. Kyung-tae never forgot the lesson his mother taught him that day in his office, holding that folder in his shaking hands. Protection didn't mean hiding the people you loved from the truth. It meant standing beside them, facing whatever came together, no matter how dangerous the world outside their door might be. This has been another story from Beyond Soul Stories. If you enjoyed this journey with Evelyn and Kyung-tae, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs a good cry today, and drop a comment letting me know which part hit you the hardest. And if you still haven't subscribed after everything this family went through, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now, turn on that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next story.